Today we're going to have our last lecture on World War II. I'm going to go ahead and cover 8.3 and 8.4 today. They're both fairly short, so I'm just going to go ahead and get it out of the way at once. And what we're looking at here with 8.3 is the home front. A lot of our fighting, of course, all of our fighting is done elsewhere. But we've got to prepare for that fighting elsewhere. So how are we going to do that? And the first thing, like we saw with World War I, is that we have to get everybody on board. Everybody. We've got a lot to do. After World War I, we went through a big period of disarmament. I'm not saying we completely got rid of everything, but we did away with a lot of stuff. So what we need to do now is we need to create the Army. And again, not just create an army, we got to create two fighting forces. We've got to have two armies, two navies, so we can go fight on two fronts. So we've got a lot to do. And it's not just as easy, it's not just as simple as raising an army, building a boat. We need to go all in, and we need every single person at home fully supporting that effort. And we're going to do that using propaganda. Underneath it here, I've got 4 cartoons. And what you can do is you can go to the actual sway presentation that's in Canvas, and you can look at these 4. There's so many, and these are cartoons. Some of these that you may have seen. This one right here is actually a Looney Tunes. It's a Bugs Bunny cartoon that you might see on Cartoon Network, and this is actually a Walt Disney cartoon. This one is a Private Snafu, and Private Snafu is one that only soldiers would have seen, and some of those are fairly risque that they would not have put those out there for public consumption. But we're going to pay artists, and they're going to design posters, and if you look around the room you can see some, but they're going to put out there some pretty good posters. And the thing with posters is it doesn't have a lot of words, it just has a few, and the images that they put on there are meant to evoke emotion. The movie theaters are going to play these cartoons, these shorts, these newsreels, and these newsreels are out there and they're showing footage, and a lot of them are going to be, you're not going to see footage of a defeat unless it is going to evoke sympathy and get us involved, more involved. You're going to see heroic actions in these newsreels, and again, it's all about an emotional reaction to get you involved. And it's not just about that, but what have we got to do? Well, first of all, we've got to give money, and it's not going to always be voluntary in terms of buying war bonds, though that's important. And you do see that war bonds helped raise more than $60 million, but there's also going to be a withholding tax, that income tax withholding, and Americans have to be on board with that. And we've done it before, but to see it being withheld now. And so we put out there how much money we need and what we need to build and what we need to do. And so you're going to see them raising money with that income tax. Where do we get all of our raw materials? Well, we've got to get the government involved, and so they're going to create the War Production Board, and it's going to redirect raw materials. Raw materials, oil, things like sugar, fats, food, those are the kinds of things too, but also steel. If you have anything that could be used for the war effort, they have drives to turn that, to turn that stuff in. Go look at all your scrap metal. Turn this stuff in. Also, we're not going to make as many cars during the war because cars are important for us, but we need to make now tanks, and we need to make planes, and we need to make, instead of consumer goods, we need to make war goods. So you're going to begin to see the government also going out to industry. And the government does not take over industry. They do not take over industry like we saw Germany doing, or even Italy doing. It is not that kind of effort, but they do pretty much force industry to switch over from consumer goods to wartime goods. They get to keep all the profits, so it's not the government taking over. But we need it. We need it. And again, you've got all of that propaganda, and people are happy to comply. People are very happy to comply. Rationing. And again, you see force the public to conserve resources. World War I, it was voluntary rationing, but this is forced rationing, and you have war rationing books, coupon books, and you're only allotted so much gas per month, so much meat per month, eggs, sugar, flour. All of these things are rationed. Okay, it's not to say that you're necessarily, well, you're doing without, but you have enough to survive. You have enough to live, and we're feeding all of our people, all of our boys. So we need that. And again, it's important to know that propaganda is going to play a role. This is the real point of propaganda. This is how you win a war. You don't win it just on the front. You've got to win it at home too, and the people have to be willing to go all in. I mean, it's kind of trite, but the American people have to be all in. So that's this is the first question I want you to answer. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give me any questions unless you truly have something you don't understand today, but you're going to answer throughout the lecture today. There's 4 questions, 2 with 8.3 and 2 with 8.4. So the first question is, why was propaganda necessary? Don't tell me why they did it. We know why they did it. It's listed up there in number 1. But why is it necessary? Okay, what's the real, hey, propaganda, why is it necessary? So write that answer down, and just put a number 1. You can put 8.3 on the front of the paper and 8.4 on the back, and this is number 1 on 8.3. Okay, and if you need a minute, just hit pause and then start back. The war effort also saw, there was also some things going on with women and minorities, okay? Good and bad for both, okay? And so I've got that split up to women on the home front and women on the home war front for all of these groups, okay? So I'm going to go through and kind of talk about this. So women, the war is good for women. I think that overall, in terms of the status of women, that World War II was good. Men went to fight, women went to work. Women went to work in the industry. This is where we see that big symbol, that female symbol of World War II, Rosie the Riveter. And women are going to enter the workforce, and they're going to become riveters, and they're going to be building, they're going to be building heavy machinery for the war, and we needed them. The workforce needed them. On the war front, they do not fight in combat. They do not. However, they are allowed to join the military in a volunteer position, and you have almost a little over 250,000 women joining the armed forces. You have the WACs, you have the WAVES. The WACs is the Women's Auxiliary Corps for the Army, and the WAVES are the Women's Auxiliary Corps for the Navy. They do almost everything except fight. They drive trucks. They do deliveries. They fly planes. They are mostly, of course, same thing as women mostly do. They're nurses, they're secretaries. They don't really gain rank, and once the war is over, some women want to remain, but there's a lot going on, and the Government's not ready for that, though, and there's court cases about women who gained rank and using that as seniority. So, but we'll look at that later. African Americans, there's some positive and negative here. They were integral into our home front effort also. You have the double V, victory at home, victory abroad. But African Americans were not treated equally at the beginning of the war. They were not given jobs in wartime industries, and it took labor leader, he's an African American labor leader, A. Philip Randolph, to essentially threaten a march on Washington if blacks did not get equal access to wartime jobs. Now, FDR is popular among African Americans due to the New Deal, even though much of the New Deal didn't do a lot to help blacks. But here, he wasn't getting involved. The war is cranked up, and he's just not that invested in civil rights at all. And A. Philip Randolph is going to force him to become involved. And why does this march, the threat of this march on Washington, why does that get FDR's attention? Well, if we're using propaganda to unite Americans, what would news stories of blacks marching on Washington in protest look like in the press and around the world? So there's a lot going on here, and we could look at this and say that this is really the beginning of the civil rights movement, because it does begin as soon as the war ends, the civil rights movement that we look at. So it's an interesting thing here to think about, but they're going to be integral. They're going to be given they're going to be given equal access to these jobs. And FDR does sign an executive order establishing the Fair Employment Practices Commission. On the war front, you have nearly 1 million African Americans in combat during World War II. Initially, they're prohibited from fighting, but that's not going to be allowed to keep going forever, just because we need it. We needed the numbers. Is it right that that's the only reason they got to fight? No. But it did allow them into the combat positions. You have the Tuskegee Airmen who come out of this. That's that all-black squadron of pilots. So they did benefit a good bit during the war, not quite as seamless as women, but there was a big benefit to African Americans. Native Americans, nearly a quarter of your Native American population is employed, or your workforce is employed in the war defense industry. So the war is going to provide income to a significant number of Native Americans. On the war front, you have code talkers. These are Navajo, and they're going to be the ones, our operators, our radio operators, because they're just speaking their Navajo language, and nobody can break it. That it is an unbreakable code because it's a language. So they're going to be instrumental with the Marines on the war front too. Mexican Americans, lot of discrimination here, and there's discrimination against all of these groups, okay? But the Mexican Americans are actually going to move to the cities to work because, again, there's jobs, and that's what people do. They move to the cities to find those wartime jobs. And also, well, let me back up. I just misstated that. They're not going to move to the cities. As people move to the cities, there's going to be agricultural jobs that are open. And so what's going to happen is Mexicans are going to be invited to come to the U.S. Mexican immigrants are going to be invited into the U.S. to work agriculture. you have some who are going to be in Los Angeles, some Mexican Americans in Los Angeles, and this is where the discrimination comes in, because they look different. They wear the zoot suit, which is a very distinctive suit, very wide shoulders, and it kind of goes down into a V to tapered ankles. And the Mexican Americans are going to be attacked, and then you're going to have the zoot suit riots in LA. On the war front, though, 17 Congressional Medals of Honor won by Mexican Americans, which is a high number. Probably the worst instance of discrimination during the war is of course done to the Japanese Americans. We were attacked. Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, and the Japanese, they're not right off of our coast by no means, but then again, neither was Hawaii either. And so there is fear that they may attack us again, but also understand that on the West Coast there is a significant number of Japanese Americans. So there was a significant portion of people in the states on the West Coast asking FDR to, help us out because we're looking for spies, we're looking for saboteurs, and we are fearful that the Japanese Americans are going to support their homeland. Although many Japanese Americans are actually American citizens, they were born within the United States. But on February 19th, 1942, just a couple of months after Pearl Harbor, FDR is going to issue that executive order in which all of the Japanese Americans are, it says moved away from military facilities, but really on the West Coast, they're going to be moved to interior internment camps. Okay, and this is a concentration camp. Okay, so you've got more than 100,000 Japanese Americans forced into concentration camps within the United States. The Japanese are going to sue. A guy by the name of Korematsu is going to sue the United States. And the United States, the Supreme Court is going to rule that the government is within their rights because of the military urgency of the situation. Oddly, even though they could not originally enlist in the war, they're allowed to in 1943. And the Japanese American unit, the 442nd, served in Europe, and they become the most decorated unit in U.S. history. So my question here for you, and I want you to answer, this is your second question for 8.3, is generally, was the war positive or negative for women and minorities? Just generally. And I don't mean list specifics why it was good or bad, but in general, overall, was the war good for women and minorities, or was it bad? And then just tell me why, okay? All right, so we've talked in the battles with 8.2 about the end of the war, and we have VE Day in May of 1945, and we have VJ Day in August of 1945. So what comes after and why? Okay, and one of the first things that comes after are the war crimes trials. But you have two sets of war crimes trials. Okay, you have two sets. You have the Nuremberg trials in Europe, which is putting the Nazis on trial, and then you have the Japanese war crime trials, in which you're putting the Japanese commanders and the Japanese government on trial. So let's look at why the Nuremberg trials, why the Germans, and a lot of that, of course, has to do with the Holocaust, and a lot of anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews in Europe, not just in Germany, in Europe, even in the United States. And we didn't all go this far, okay? And a lot of this is, you look at that final solution, and a lot of it is based on what's going on in the United States, looking at racial purity. things like that. So let's look first at anti-Semitism, which I said was a hatred of Jews. How does it lead to the final solution? And we saw this with the New Germany in the video. Jews are blamed for what went wrong, what was going wrong, everything going on. You're poor, Jews' fault. We were defeated in World War I. Well, that was the Jews. The government under, before Hitler, the one who signed the treaty, well, that was the Jews. So you're looked at a convenient scapegoat, and Hitler puts that in Mein Kampf, and it's all of a sudden true. So they're going to begin to implement laws and policies that are discriminatory against Jewish citizens. Jews can't work in this line of work, and they can't do that, and they can't live here. They have to wear the Star of David, and they're going to take away their citizenship. And then it's just, it starts small, and it just gets bigger and more rights until finally they have no rights. Which kind of leads us, takes us to the next step, which is the final solution. And the final solution to the Jewish problem is the extermination of the Jewish race. They did try to get rid of them. The Nuremberg laws, some of that was, let's get them to leave. And they made it easy for them to leave. They did. They set up a room, and you went around and you did all of your checkpoints, and you paid all of your money so you and your family could leave and get out of Germany, because that's easy too. The problem is nobody would take them. France took 80,000 Jews. Britain took 60,000 Jews. The United States took 100,000 Jews, and the rest were denied. And Germany is like, we're trying to send them. Our problem is that no one else wants them. That's what I mean by anti-Semitism didn't exist just in Germany. It exists throughout the world. Okay. There was a ship that had left Germany full of Jews. It makes it to the United States, and it sits in a harbor while we decide, are we going to take them? And we finally decide no, and we sent them back, and just about every single one on that ship is executed in the Holocaust. Okay, so that's the next solution. That is the final solution. Well, if we can't get anybody else to take them, we're going to kill them. And so this is the extermination of the Jewish race through mass genocide. Jews are rounded up. They're separated from their families, and they're either killed or shipped to concentration camps. We're going to watch a video on genocide. And as a matter of fact, that's what it's called. It's called genocide. And you can see and hear the survivors talk about how it worked, because it didn't start. It starts slow, and then it kind of speeds up. The result of the Holocaust is that 6 million Jews are killed. That's a number. But a percentage is about fraction, but it's 2/3 of the Jewish population. So it's significant. It's very significant, the number of Jews that are killed and murdered during the Holocaust. It was not just the Jews, though. You do have other targets, and we saw that with the New Germany. Who all are they going after? But they're going after the Gypsies, ethnic Poles. Those are the Polish, the incurably sick. We want a healthy race of people, and people with Down syndrome, people with insanity problems, or people with dementia, people who are in long care homes. They're going to be murdered. Euthanasia at first, and then they're just going to kill them. Political opponents, anybody who doesn't support Hitler. Probably one of the best stories that I've read is Sophie Scholl, who, with a group of students, her brother, one of them, put out pamphlets about why Hitler and Nazis are so bad. Security guard at the school sees them, rounds them up, and then they are put on a trial with no lawyer, no one really to represent them. It's not a fair trial. And she and they are executed by beheading. with a guillotine. You also have Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't declare, they refuse to salute. They refuse to swear an oath to Germany and Hitler, so get rid of those. Soviet POWs, also homosexuals. Again, homosexuality incurably sick. You can't. You're looking at a group of people who aren't going to propagate the perfect race. But about 11 million overall are killed in the Holocaust, and the Holocaust, the war crimes trials there, because when do we know what's going on? Yes and no. Our government has a good idea about what's going on. There were pictures, there were stories that were smuggled out. There were people who told our government. Could we have stopped it? That I don't know. You know, can you blow up a train, or at least the rail lines that stop the trains from going into Auschwitz? I don't know if we could have stopped it. We definitely could have taken more, but we didn't. And so as the Russians come west, and as the other allies, the British and the the British and the Americans move west, and we begin to liberate these camps, we're horrified. We're horrified. And we figure that we've got to do something, and so we're going to put them on trial. And that is your war crimes trials. 20 Nazi leaders are tried for crimes against humanity, several sentenced to death. Few have long prison sentences. And it does show us that everybody is responsible for their actions during war. It is not killing people, because people die in war. It is the crimes against humanity. It is the way you treat prisoners of war in this case. And it was appalling. And so just following orders is not an adequate defense. And we did have also, like I said, war crimes trials for the Japanese. Now, the Japanese treated POWs and those conquered harshly. We can look at the rape of Nanking. We can look at the way they treated the Chinese in general. You have pleasure women. The Chinese women that they captured and were forced to, well, essentially raped by Japanese soldiers. Also, the treatment of the American POWs was atrocious. We saw some of that on the video about Japan. After the war, we're going to try many of those Japanese military leaders. We're going to execute 7, including Tojo. He was the leader of the government, that military leader of the government. So there were more trials. Why? Why were there so many more against the Japanese as opposed to the Europeans? And that's the question I want you to ask. Why do you think? What might be the reason why we have more war crimes trials? Why might we, the United States, treat the Japanese more harshly than we treated the Germans? Okay, so I want you to answer that. That's your first question for 8.4. Okay. And then finally, scientific and technological discoveries post-World War II. Well, the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. That was going to change the way we fight. Warfare thereafter. We could drop the bomb in World War II because we were the only ones that had it. Can we drop it today? Can we just drop a bomb on our enemy, a nuclear bomb on our enemy, and expect the war to be over as we did with Japan? And the answer is no, because they might have a nuclear bomb, or their allies might. And so now what we begin to see, and we'll see this in Chapter 9, Russia, particularly the Soviet Union, is going to develop their own bomb, but other countries are too. And we still talk about places like North Korea becoming nuclear and their development of the bomb, or Iran. These are countries that are not overly friendly toward us. Should we worry? Yeah. If they have the bomb, is that going to affect how we fight them? Yeah, it is. So this is going to change the way we fight wars, okay? And it's going to lead to a nuclear arms race, and that's going to be the, the Cold War. But we also have some other innovations that come out of the war. Radar, which, we'll use that, of course, to defeat the German Luftwaffe at the Battle of Britain. But also, you think about how we use it today for our airplanes and flying, and you can see where planes are in the sky, and air traffic control and all of that. Sonar, we use it, of course, for our military, but think about looking for lost treasure, but also think about using it to map the floor of the ocean. So we have some non-military uses for it. Microwave, I've understood that the whole microwave deal was a mistake, but don't we love it today? Of course, cooking food faster than in a regular oven. It's not always that good, or as good, but it's still good. Computers we have today, the one that's in your pocket, the one you're watching this on, is tiny. They used to have a computer that took up a whole room and could do basic math. But of course, over time, they become more useful. They can do more functions, and of course, they become much smaller. In terms of healthcare, or not just healthcare, you got pesticides in this, but antibiotics are going to be discovered. Heart transplants. Some of these doctors, those doctors who are having to do all of the surgery and things like that, they're going to come back home after the war, and they're going to begin to innovate. Pesticides. It's funny how a pesticide helps us. Now, I know we look at pesticides today with some negative connotations in terms of pollution, cancer causing, things like that. But imagine that with pesticides, how much more of a crop survives. And so what you're looking at here is more food available. Does it end world hunger? No. Could it put a dent in it? Yeah. Also, the fact that the United States becomes one of the first lice-free armies in the world due to some pesticides. So anyway, I'm just saying, a lot of good things come out of that. And also, radios become more portable. They're not that big, huge monstrosity that is as big as some of the old TVs. They become portable. You can put them in your car. You have a car radio now. So the final question I want you to answer is, did World War II make our lives easier or harder? And you can answer either way. Just tell me why you say that. Okay? So that's your number 2 question. So you've got your 4 questions. Make sure that you label each one so I know that which number 1 it is. Okay? Number 1, 8.3 or 8.4. Okay? And if you have any questions, you could also write that down, and I'll try to answer that with the class.